Welcome back for another panel here at the Private Equity Summit in Munich 2021 digital edition. It's all about ESG this year and same for us. So I would welcome my four treasured guests for a panel called PESG, how to make ESG integration work, which is really the substantial question. All right. So why don't I welcome H.Brede at first, with Up to Invest, a fund of funds active in the area both of private equity, venture capital and real estate, former CRO of the Allianz Real Estate Organization, which is where we met actually some years ago. Welcome, Hauke. Great to have you.
Thank you so much.
Secondly, it's A.Rickert of Nixdorf Kapital and Fineo. He's really a seasoned impact investing guy. Welcome to the show, Andreas. Also a bestseller author. If you look at the Manager Magazine ranking, you will find him with his latest book in the top 10. Great to have you with us, Andreas. Let's talk about impact. All right.
Right. Thanks for having me.
Yes, you're welcome. M.Schulz asked the impact. Matthias actually is a non-traditional investor here, active in the area of agriculture and forestry. Really interesting and pretty near to the topic, I guess. And Matthias will further explain how this could be an interesting investment, firstly, and then also a good ESG play. Welcome.
Thank you, Thomas.
Matthias. Yes. Michael Wieser with B2B Business to Ventures from Switzerland, from Helvetica, all the new funds too, is with us. And Michael, not only being a seasoned VC, also has development a certain formula with regard to making ESG feasible in the VC space, and that would be interesting to know. Hello, Michael. Great to have you with us.
Hello, happy to be a part.
Thanks. Good. Then let's get started. I mean, ESG is all the rage since maybe 2 or 3 years, but apparently it's not really a new thing. Ain't Gonna Play in Sun City was some years ago, because we would mostly talk about the E in ESG, but there are other factors which we don't deny. But enough stuff, I would say, for additional panels. So maybe if we stick to the alphabetical order, Hauke, what was actually the first time when you were confronted with something that we currently discuss as ESG?
Well, that's a very good question. And I think it is almost 10 years ago that in my good old days at Allianz, we had a working session with my fellow colleagues from AIM, Allianz Investment Management. And this was really, I mean, the starting point where we decided as an institutional investor that we are only willing to invest in ESG compliant funds. And the question was, well, how do we do this? And do we have to differentiate our approach vis-a-vis different asset classes? So, I mean, you mentioned before real estate. I think in real estate, the E is very large, yeah, and very important, but maybe in other asset classes, more than I think our basic understanding was we have to look at each of these 3 characters or each asset class, but find a unique approach.
Right. So 10 years ago, Andreas, that's maybe an easy one for you. Tell us about your initial involvement. We will define later, you know, the difference between impact investment and ESG, but take it as a whole, maybe. What was your first stint with the topic at hand?
But more goals at the SDGs, then we see that we have to mobilize the finance industry to solve those education, equality gap, all issues. Philanthropy by no means can solve, but also governmental money won't be enough. So if we see that, then it's a no-brainer that we also have to use the private sector, the financial industry. So that's why we have a need. And at the same time, we can always see the SDGs just as a challenge, but we can also see it as opportunities. You can always build, in many cases, build a business opportunity on climate change, etc. And this is where I came into the game roughly 12 years ago. So I was looking at opportunities to achieve impact across all the different spectrum from philanthropy to investment. And this is why I'm quite happy that by now, it took quite a few years, impact investing and also ESG is really on the rise. And I see that it will become mainstream pretty soon.
Oh, I believe that, and it's all about whatever you do, it's about stick to your knitting for a decade or two, and there will be the hard times when you really are regarded as a moron and no one listens to you, and then you superstar for the next phase that really calms you down. Matthias, you're not actually a farmer by background and by education, but you have now chosen the field, good word, of agriculture and forestry to apply ESG criteria a lot, I would say, in that field. Maybe you could, for a minute, give us your background in the area.
Absolutely, yes, and I think I'll use a very concrete example here. So we started out as a more or less classical agriculture and forestry fund, and we were talking to a big investor, actually in a Hamburg family office. And we were doing all this, like carbon saving, all these measures. And it was very concrete, very hands-on on the field, quite literally. But what we are asking now, what is ESG, boiled down for us to the question, how do we measure this for investors? How can we show this for an actual investor, what is done in reality? How can we keep ourselves accountable for this? And this is essentially where I started developing a feeling for what ESG means now. It doesn't only mean on the ground that you have all this and you do all this, but it means more of it. You have a strategy, I don't know, whatever it means, does it have a repercussion on you because your carry depends on it? All these questions that are relevant from an investor point of view. And that's where I discovered it for the first time. There's a whole world to it.
There's a whole world to it, and to really operationalize ESG and II, impact investing, is the most important thing, which gives me the opportunity for a mini ad, because I'm heading as a honorary position the German Association of Institutional Investors, which really an association of startups sort of, but we are now gaining traction this year. And what we do is to have our first module of a planned study degree at Mannheim Business School, and it's called Quantifying Sustainable Investment. So we say, the Max Weber type Gesinnungsethiker have talked enough now, and we really to operationalize all that. So check it out, Mannheim Business School, Quantifying Sustainable Investment. We have a World League faculty there with Sir Ronald Cohen on impact investments, founder of Apex Partners, now with the Portland Trust, with Harvard Management Company, Allianz, of course, MEAG, Munich Re, Oxford University, Chicago, and everyone. I would say it's the #1 European program, at least. It takes you 3 days. Check it out. So that was my ad. So that was my payment, I guess, for today to deliver this message. But it's now up to Michael really to tell us how he gained traction with the ESG topic. Michael.
Yeah, sure. So throughout the years when we've been working with startups, we noticed that several successful founders have this deeply embedded value system in them. And at some point in time, when their organization grows, they've put a lot of emphasis on building a great company culture. And at some point in time, we thought, okay, this is some form of expression of ESG. And at the same time, we became involved in a research project together with Uni St. Gallen and EPFL Lausanne to make ESG criteria for startups measurable to some extent. And of course, the interesting part here, the project started 2018, was to bridge the kind of the claim, the result you want to have in terms of making something measurable, but at the same time facing the reality that startups initially, when they're very young, don't have ESG criteria very high on their priority list. So therefore, we worked together with these institutions on a structured approach to give founders a simple framework at hand on how to make this happen?
Yeah, simplicity is important too, because many LPs too are overwhelmed now, and they say, well, it's really a good cause, but I don't know, you know, they have these catalogs of criteria, and I think it's basically a good thing that I want to support. So let's really get the products out that are able to do that. And yeah, so that's interesting to know. Just staying put with this topic, how can the LPs in your fund actually assess the ESG readiness of the GPs? I mean, you're a fund of fund in the PEVC space. What can you support them with in terms of assessing?
Yeah, I think this is really critical, and it's really a must-have nowadays. Investors really require this. Is not a nice to have anymore. So for, I think, our investors, we said we are, for example, providing a so-called ESG manager rating, where we believe by looking at a couple of things, I mean, how is ESG implemented in the organization? How is ESG actually used during the pre-deal phase? And how is ESG also used, I mean, in ongoing management of the assets, all the way down to the fourth point? What is the track record, not from a financial standpoint, but from an ESG standpoint? And I think I really would like to sum it up to say, if you can't measure it, yeah, you can't control it. So we try to make something that is more qualitative in nature, more quantitative, by providing this kind of rating. So every fund that actually is becoming a part of our fund of fund has to go through this assessment. So this is actually something we then provide to the investors. And from the very get-go of our fund of fund strategy, we said we need to be ESG compliant, and it needs to be really then on a fund level all the way down to a portfolio level, similar to what Michael was just explaining, that, I mean, every single VC portfolio company needs to be ESG compliant. And that's actually the answer to your question.
And is this also maybe a little add-on question? Is this really a sell for your investors in the fund? So do you actively tell it, or is it like, oh, he has good target funds, I'm with him, but you know, ESG, I don't care? What is the honest answer to that in these months?
Well, it's, I mean, the short answer is it was really a surprise that we had some target fund managers who said 2 years ago, only 2 years ago, ESG what? So, I mean, we really didn't select them as part of our fund of fund. But I mean, let's say funds like Michael's organization B2V is more, I mean, upfront. They even shape the industry by defining the so-called ROSE framework. So I rather like to work with these guys and say, well, this is really what is helping investors. And similar to what Andreas said, not just to see we can avoid certain risk, but I think there's a clear opportunity by looking at ESG.
Right. And it's good to know that really people have been working at least mid-time on making it operational already. So Andreas, really to clarify now, I mean, we're talking about ESG altogether. What is the difference maybe between ESG and impact investing then?
Yeah, it's a good question. Maybe building on what Hauke just said, ESG is the must. And then you can build impact investing on it. So just a very rough definition. So if you apply ESG criteria, you try to avoid harm. So you make sure that you are not harming the world on all these 3 different levels. If you go into the impact investing arena, you turn it into the positive impact. So that means you are, by intention, invest with impact. You want to see that you have a positive impact on different aspects. So this is the definition. And if I say that, it becomes clear that impact investing is not an asset class, it's a strategy. So it's a strategy which is underlined by a specific mindset and intention. And then we go one step beyond, and you can basically apply impact investing to all different asset classes. And you have 3 criteria. So you have return, risk, this is everybody knows, and that's the 3rd dimension, that's impact. And within this room, you can basically define what is your impact strategy, your investment strategy. And briefly looking at the history, so at the beginning, it was mainly done by high net worth individuals and family offices. They were the first ones really doing impact investing, very tailor-made and very sharpen the way how they did it. And now I see that it's really moving into other asset classes. So at the beginning was mainly private equity, startup funding, but now we see it in all the different asset classes, also up to real assets like real estate, etc. And we see that all different investor types are now also coming into the field. So we are talking to institutional investors. In particular, as you know, I'm working with Nixdorf Kapital. So we are also talking to institutional investors, and this is the game changer. So this is why I say impact investing becomes mainstream, because we see it in all different asset classes, and we see that all different investor types are coming into the play. And this is why impact investing is the next step.
And Heinz Nixdorf was an impact investor in his own right, really doing things for his local environment and taking care of environmental aspects back then, decades ago. That's an interesting story. Andreas, we will talk a little bit about your fundraising in a minute, but there's another question that comes to mind, is the structure for the OISEF structure for impact investment funds at the European, at the EU level. I remember Bond Venture in Munich, also an early pioneer in the field, is using this structure. Could you tell us, when you looked at it, do you consider this for your funds too, or is it technically not feasible?
Yeah, maybe, as you just mentioned it, I would like to briefly react to that. You said Heinz Nixdorf, and for me, impact investing, it sounds new. And yes, we're using all the different new buzzwords, and we are indeed applying new instruments. We're talking about qualifying impact, etc. This is new. The way of it, the underlying mindset, the values, this is not new. And in particular, I would say the way of having a value-driven economy is deeply engraved in the German history and also in the at least continental European way to do businesses. And this is why I think we should also be a driving force out of Europe to really drive impact investing in the future. So this is building on where we are coming from. Having said that, there are a lot of different frameworks when we are talking about measuring impact. And I really like that we are not just having a good gut feeling when we're talking about impact investing, but we really can show that we are having impact. Again, we don't have one standard yet, but the market is developing very quickly. You mentioned also Ronnie Cohn. So he was not only in the private equity field, but is also one of the leading figures in the impact investing world. He has initiated the G7 task force on impact investing, also roughly 10 years ago. And I had the privilege to be also a member of the task force. And out of that, we have now developed new frameworks. For example, the Impact Measurement Project, I would like to mention. There are more than 1,000 organizations coming together, and we agreed on frameworks we would like to apply when it comes to impact investing. So here you can see we are coming out of the phase where every investor is developing its own instrument, but we are using the same instruments, leading to a more efficient field, and also we can use benchmarks, etc. So the market is really mature.
Good. So to give this more operational grip, Matthias, maybe you can give us an example of how you implement the impact investing structure in the area of agriculture and forestry within your fund.
Yeah, absolutely, Thomas. And I'm glad to add to what Andreas just said. I think, so we are an impact fund. We have forestry and agriculture. And we actually invest directly into the target country. So we do have our own teams on the ground. It's very much hands-on. And it all comes around to how do you measure impact on the ground? And then we developed 180 criteria. These are actually criteria that refer to the project, that refer to the management, and they just have to be fulfilled on the project level, and they have to be tested. And I just give a very concrete example. An ecological criteria, for example, is you have to use cover crops. So the land does not lie bare, and it doesn't wash away. There has to be grass on it all the time. Social criteria, for example, could be that you do not invest in disputed land. So if the ownership is disputed, it's just off limits to you, and it's just excluded. And all these criteria you have on the project level. And then how do you use this for investors? You have to put it on the fund level. And there we use independent auditors that come to the projects and just test all these criteria. By the way, most of the criteria are rather, you have to have actually yes, no criteria, because it's very difficult to test them on the ground once you start developing them. They come, they test it, and report to an independent ESG board. We have an independent ESG board, members from academia, industry experts, and they evaluate whether these criteria are fulfilled on the project, in each project. And it should not stop there. I think a comprehensive strategy should then go to the advisor. And how is this done by us? In our example, the ESG board, once they determine how good we are at fulfilling our impact, they can decide upon a part of our carry. So if we don't fulfill what we said we want to fulfill, it really hurts. I think there it is full circle. You start on the project level, very much hands-on, you go to the fund level, and then you go to the advisor. And interestingly enough, this is something where investors have been very much in the driving seat. It's not a coincidence. It's with Andreas and Nixdorf Kapital that we have been working together, and they were really pushing into the right direction. So they are a strategic partner for us, and it was really, really great to have them, because there you could actually say investors want this to be measured. They want this to have like a very, very concrete impact on your carry, because that way they can be sure it really works.
I think that's interesting, and that sounds like a lot of criteria, and that's good, to be honest. And I think there's an overarching topic here, in that we can give additional chances, you know, to regions and countries like Africa, like Eastern Europe, as you have mentioned. And it's not about building Silk Roads to sell your own stuff, but it's about really to giving them a fair chance, you know, not this paternalistic approach. And I like that pretty much. So, Michael,
maybe can I briefly just add one thing, because we just heard now from ASC how they're doing it, but also Matthias mentioned that we were asking for those instruments. But here you can see that it's really also about partnerships. So we are asking for those things because Nixdorf Kapital, so we are the ones, we're a platform for impact investing, but our partners are the ones who have to apply it, to use it. And this is why we are also seeing ourselves as smart investors. So we are asking for those instruments, but at the end of the day, they have to come with solutions, and we just prove that this is sufficient enough. And here you can see who has really the driver's seat, and more importantly, also that we are not just want to see the data as a controlling instrument, but also as an instrument so that they can continuously learn. And you can say so nicely, impact investing and the measurement has two different goals: to prove and to improve the impact. So this is what we are trying to do with our partners.
This actually leads to a very interesting thing that we learned in the process. If you really want to do impact and ESG, and then you cannot start with a perfect ESG score in a project. Actually, it is very interesting if you have a project at the beginning that has a red score with ESG, it might be the better impact because there's more room for improvement, exactly what Andreas just said. But like when you start out and you see, oh, they invest into 3 projects that are red or orange or yellow or I don't know what, this is not a bad sign. It can actually be a better sign than if everything is green. Well, wow, they really didn't move that much.
Very, very interesting thing. Michael, if we want to put the needle towards the greener regions within the startup space, I think ROSE is the thing to use. Can you explain in a few sentences what ROSE is all about and how it works?
Yeah, absolutely. So it connects a little bit to what Matthias just said. So basically, imagine a startup, maybe 3 people, 4 people. They start off with an idea, a new business model, new product. They want to make something work. Their initial focus is, of course, to make it work, to finish developing the product, to hire people, to make revenue, or to become profitable at some point in time, to get funding, all these things. So the question is, how do you measure ESG? There's no way you can do it, because by definition, venture capital is mainly looking for outliers. Yeah, so we often invest in business models that don't exist yet. So how can you measure something or put it in the context of something, where you have no benchmarks? So the framework we have co-developed called ROSE takes a procedural approach. So instead of saying, like with public companies, there are benchmarks A, B, C. Yeah, we say there are no benchmarks. Yeah, you start off on a green field, but what we expect is that you think about all the impact you're having, you try to measure them, and you try to improve. Yeah. So we kind of force a process that we want to establish with the founders, where we regularly revisit ESG criteria in board meetings and say, okay, last year we were here, this year we're here, what has changed? And of course, things change a lot, because typically a company would grow, the team would grow, the product might shift from here to there. Yeah? So a lot of things are constantly moving, and you need to readapt, reassess, etc. And this is the role framework we have co-developed is a tool set that helps founders kind of along this process, along this evolution.
Very good, and I learn it's more about details, than agenda and talking a lot to really get that impact in the ESG field as well as in the II field altogether. Hauke, there are not only chances, but there are also challenges. Looking forward maybe to 2025, what are the main challenges in the ESG space to really make it work on a broader scale?
Yeah, I think similar to what everybody else said here on this panel, I think it's a journey. Yeah, so I think you start somewhere and you try to improve things over time. Yeah, I think that's really important. I strongly believe if you can't measure it, you can't control it. So you need to make, these efforts visible. So that's actually, for example, what I like about the ROSE framework, because you have an assessment and you define targets and then you see how you're performing against these targets. So to answer your question is, we need to make sure that this becomes more operational, that we measure it on a month by month, quarter by quarter basis. That's number one. I think one challenge that we really do this as opposed to just talking about it. And the second point, which is I think equally important, we need to have some kind of standards. Right now, it's all over the place, right? Because there are no real standards how you really make sure that you assess ESG risk in real estate, in private equity, in infrastructure, yeah, or agriculture. So from an investor standpoint, let's say who's investing in multi-asset classes, you need to bring it all together. Yeah, so you could actually look at one common denominator, which is, let's say, your CO2 emissions that actually you can reduce. Yeah, and here, you can define this is besides the risk return profile, similar to what Andreas said, your maybe non-quantifiable goal, but you can quantify it and see this is what we want to do by 2030, by 2040, and have really concrete measures. I think that would be for me my most important point as a challenge to make this happen.
Right. Andreas, I always touch the technical issues too. So being in the fundraising with Nixdorf Kapital currently, we talk about how to operationalize it. So apparently it needs to be somewhere stated, somewhere in the contracts within the fundraising process. And give us a little technical sneak peek here. Where do you integrate this in the placement memorandum, in the LPA, in the site letter? Where do we talk about ESG when it comes to fund documentation?
Yeah, it has to be engraved on all different levels. So first of all, we heard from Matthias, so the funds and investment targets we do on board. So here we develop very rigorous frameworks. So this is on the one side. On the other side, when we talk to the investors, and we have very positive reaction, I have to say, then we explain to them, what is our mission? What is our core belief? How you do impact investing? And then honestly, we also only work together with investors who embark on this journey and who would like to achieve impact. Yes, we can really show that impact investing doesn't harm the financial return. On the contrary, we can show that even in particular in circumstances like this, impact investing has shown remarkable resilience and we see that so impact and a financial return will come at the same time. But we have the, let's say, privilege that we can choose with whom we do investments, who will be our investor partners in our vehicles. And we also would like to see not only greedy partners, but also partners who, from a normative perspective, like what we do. So this is basically what we see. And maybe you can also quickly react on what Hauke said. So what are the risks? Having said that, I see a risk in impact washing. I already see that we have funds and products out there which do claim to be impact investing. And if you look at what they do, you can see that it's not impact investing. It's sustainable financing. They're applying few ESG criteria, but by no means it's impact investing. And this is a risk. So we have to show what is the gold standard, what is really impact investing. And this is where we hopefully at Nixdorf Kapital can lead the way with the right partners on the investee side as well as on the investor side, that impact investing can work and that this is leading the way. So this is, I think, where we have to be a little bit cautious.
I think, if I may add to that, what Andreas just said is really interesting. What we see right now, we see all these slides that have all these SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals, like everyone is solving 15 of these Sustainable Development Goals. I don't know how many, and it pays all to do all these UN goals. And then you actually have a very hard time to explain, well, maybe we want to concentrate on 4 of these. No, we have to do all of them at once. And it gets really, really difficult to have a good conversation about this because it's so much a topic, a fashionable topic right now. And you have to get into the conversation and say, what is tangible here? What do you actually do in this? Because everyone, of course, is doing something against global poverty. Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yes, we really have to focus as always to generate results. So let's generate a poll result here. We have one poll question to ask our audience, and the question is, what do you think ESG would be over the next few years? An urgent priority to generate value, only a secondary one, mainly barely able to generate value, or an impediment to value generation, maybe a sole risk management function, or are you not sure? Please give us your answer, dear audience, and we might have a chance to reflect on the results within this panel. So Matthias, it's about agriculture and forestry. Which one is the easier ESG play?
It's a very difficult question, honestly, to be answered, because again, you have to look at the project. If you have an existing forest in Mecklenburg-Vorpommern, well, it's already there. Your impact will be rather limited. You can do a little bit probably, and there are strategies to improve it, but it's difficult to say. So the fair answer is you have to look into each project, and you really have to decide on this. Like a generalization, at least in our fund, might be to say, obviously, an investment in agriculture helps towards global food security. So if you do this on the right, at the right place, you can actually make food more affordable and maybe closer to where it's needed, and or maybe where it should be grown. And on the forestry side, for example, we do reforestation projects. So we go to areas that have been deforested and we reforest them. So the carbon climate action SDG is very, very much impacted by this. You have a very high impact with the forestry projects, but I really hesitate, to be perfectly honest, to give a generalization. I think you should invest the time and to look into the project and to discuss with the providers what can you achieve and what's your impact that you can give.
Yeah, it's really a deep-rooted analysis we learned, and we're only taking first steps on our way to establishing really a data-driven procedure for all these experts. But everyone is interested now. I don't think it's a whole big issue, this greenwashing. Everyone is blaming each other to do greenwashing. I think even the latest arrival in the space that does something well, it will also do something good, or the other way around. So here are the results. So the question was, what would ESG be? Would it be rather be a positive factor to generate value? And 70% of our audience says yes, yes, they trust ESG to add to the value, to the returns achieved with your investments, and the ones that are not so sure. So only 30% altogether. So let's stick with this basic result, which should be encouraging. Michael, Jean Ziegler said that Swiss is whiter, but is Switzerland also greener? So in the area of ESG, are they doing more, or historically have they been earlier than Germany, for example?
I would say actually the two countries are pretty comparable when it comes to ESG. And that is because the landscape is still very fragmented. Yeah, so the main push, as I think Andreas mentioned it before, over the years came from rather smaller entities. So there was family offices, individual investors, smaller institutions that said, we will only do ESG compliant investments in the future. And so there is no standard yet, but it's rather driven by individual sets of values, that are very, I would say, typical for both our economies. So both the Swiss and the German economy is heavily, characterized by small and medium companies that are often owner-led, and with owners that have very strong sets of values, and they just stick to them. Whereas the bigger, say, financial players, they just tend to something else, without being too negative here. But this is where the initial push came from. And so I would say we will see where it develops in the next couple of years. But I would say the general trend over the years has been pretty similar in both countries.
That's encouraging. I was fearing, that Swiss goes ahead one more time, but it's good to have a certain European sense of things to come. And Andreas mentioned this as well. Why shouldn't we spearhead this initiative? I think it's our task. Originated maybe in the Nordic countries of Europe, but Germany now, Switzerland, France do a good enough job to not only catch up, but to lead the initiative over the coming years, I hope. So what are the next steps then for us? I mean, looking at the regulatory agenda, we see the disclosure ordinance in Europe already being effective now. We're waiting for the technical measures to be ready. We will have the taxonomy, of course, from January 1. If all of you just give us one sentence, is this whole regulatory agenda manageable in terms of your own fundraising projects, or how does that play out? Hauke, what is your assessment?
Well, I believe that it's necessary, unfortunately, to define certain regulations around ESG. I think we just have to wait and see to what degree this is really feasible. Are the timelines sufficient enough? I think the regulation will only harm the parties and the fund managers who are not up to speed. I think you need to actually focus on the topics at hand. Sometimes I strongly believe that it's just very simple ideas where you define the strategies and you make them visible through documentation. And that you say you focus on ESG risk, you focus on impact investing, and you say where you're doing good. And I think if you report on it, that's exactly what I said. If you don't measure it, you can't control it. So here, I think it's also to report it to your investors, because then they can compare and contrast and see that there's a clear difference between greenwashing and the real deal. That is really important. And I think you need some oversight. Unfortunately, again, always in human mankind, somebody needs to be the watchdog, that there's not just washing going on, and there's real stuff behind ESG and impact investing.
Yes, and Matthias will keep track that we're not washing out the soil, right? As we have learned. So everyone, time is over. As always, interesting topics rush by. Thank you so much for being with us at the Private Equity Summit Munich 2021. ESG is here to stay. Maybe we find a chair at the Bayerischer Hof next year together to further our discussions. But for the moment, thank you very much for taking your time for this event. Goodbye and good luck with all your treasured initiatives. Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thanks for joining us. Bye-bye.